Hello everyone and welcome to the third and final episode of the Africa CEO Forum's Fair Climate Transition series. The previous 2 weeks you had the opportunity to connect with some of our guests here who examined how to reconcile African prosperity and energy transition, as well as powering African businesses meeting energy needs for industrialization. This week we are excited to speak about how can African companies be heard by global regulators. I'm Asha Sampath, I'm a journalist. I'm excited to be here with you today, and I'm going to moderate this panel discussion with distinguished guests here with first-hand experience on the topic. I'm pleased to have one with me here in the studio and others joining remotely. So we have David Cooper, CEO of the Association of European Development Finance Institutions, Nji Ayuk, Executive Chairman of the African Energy Chamber, Lara Liberty, Head of Natural Resources for Development at the OECD Development Center, and Sanjeev Gupta, member of the EFC Board of Directors. So they're here with me, some here in the studio, some remotely, like I said earlier. We look forward to your participation too. This show is really interactive. Feel free to share with us your questions. So just a brief word about how it works. You can put your question in the Q&A tab of the Zoom app. Just let us know to whom your questions is addressed. You can channel it with the name of the speaker, and I'll do my best to get them answered and redirect them to the right panelist. And now we are ready to begin, and I'm delighted to welcome David Cooper, the CEO of the Association of European Development Finance Institutions. Well, David, good morning and welcome. You're the only one on the set here. Thank you for being here. I don't feel alone, so I was saying that. So you are the CEO of the Association of European Development Finance Institutions. So let us start probably just setting the scene. So how do you see the balance between the investment aims of European DFIs and the needs for African companies?
Yeah. Allow me to first explain what we do as development finance institutions. We are publicly owned banks. Every European country has one of these development banks. And we're there with a public mandate, but we operate according to banking principles. So what we are trying to do is to mobilize private investment, being the bridge between public aims and private money, to mobilize private investment for sustainable development purposes. Our investment aim is therefore impact. That's the investment aim. Profit is important for us to keep us alive, basically, to have a sustainable business model, etc. But profit is, in that sense, only an instrument for us. Our main investment aim is development impact. So we seek to invest in African companies that have a similar aim. So just to give you a simple example, an African company that is just there to maximize shareholder value will not easily see an investment from a European DFI. On the other hand, companies that can show that their operations are actually providing development benefits, job generation, increased resilience of a city or a village or a landscape, that's what we are in. And that's what we see in our portfolio, and we have experience for several of our members are already there for 70 years. What we see in our portfolio is a very good alignment with an increasing number of African companies and African investees.
All right, maybe a quick follow-up. So we hear many detractors or criticism around those investment conditions that actually do not necessarily reflect the field. I mean, African realities. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, our investment conditions are based on, of course, also environmental and social safeguards, apart also from the financial investment conditions that are commonplace across the financial world. But our ESG conditions are based on global standards, like the IFC standards, on the environmental and social standards. These do not stand in the way for our investments, if we can evidence by a growing portfolio over the years. African companies are actually quite able to commit to the investment conditions that we have. We have relatively low default rates. So at this moment, those conditions are well aligned with the needs of African companies, and even more with the African context they are operating in. We are concerned, though, about a fast increase in new conditions that may be created.
So you're sitting with them when you design it to make sure
Yes.
that they reflect the realities. This is what you're saying.
Exactly. That's what and that's also part of our role coming out of our public mandate, is to actually provide also technical assistance to these companies to help them commit to these conditions and then live by these conditions and make sure that they keep them.
So I will obviously get back to that to have some more specific details. Let me probably just remind you, keep your questions handy and we'll get to them. Let's maybe turn to Angie Ayuk, the Executive Chairman of the African Energy Chamber. Angie, thank you for joining us today. I think you are joining us from South Africa. Hope you're here. You can... And no, I think we lost Angie. They're on the way. Yeah, okay, fair enough. So I'll get to that one by the time the technical issues are being solved. Angie, hopefully you can connect back, so we'll get to you. Maybe let me turn. Oh, there you go. There he is. Hey, I thought you were gone. So Angie, how are you? Joining us live from South Africa.
I'm doing amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So I was just saying, so you are the Executive Chairman of the African Energy Chamber. Maybe let's focus on, I know that you've worked on arguing, you argue that actually transforming gas into electricity is Africa's economic and industrial future. So tell us first, why is this crucial for Africa? How can it contribute to economic success while addressing, energy and climate issues, which are very key? And how can we meet those demands in a sustainable way where we reduce our impact on the environment?
Gas is so important for Africa at this moment. We have to produce natural gas in a sustainable way, because we have to preface this with first understanding an African context. 600 million Africans have no access to electricity. 900 million have no access to clean cooking technologies, most of them women. A young girl in Mozambique or Tanzania stops studying at 6 o'clock in the evening because it's dark. And so that girl would not be able to compete in the future, where they have to compete with counterparts coming out of Europe or the United States or any wealthy country in the world. We need to be able to turn that around. Natural gas that Africa has in its abundance provides us a way to drive growth, drive industrialization, do gas to power projects, but it can be done in a cleaner, better, and sustainable fashion. It's the cleanest form of fossil fuels in an area where we have to deal with phasing out or phasing down or walking away from coal. Natural gas provides that, and it provides hope. And I tell you this, if you look at where Europe was when the crisis started in Ukraine, Europe didn't turn to renewables. Europe didn't turn to solar and wind. They have all the money to use solar and wind. They turned to coal, and they use coal. They declared natural gas green energy. Natural gas is green energy in Europe. So why is natural gas green energy in Europe, and then it's not green energy for the poorest people of the world? And their finance institutions finance natural gas as green energy in Europe, but it doesn't in Africa. Africa has a chance for industrialization. We could take natural gas and really drive up human flourishing, do urea, ammonia, NPK, fertilizer plants. So we don't have to go beg for food in Ukraine and Russia, and we can produce food right here in Africa. And we would not be able to create jobs and opportunities. So our young men and women do not have to risk crossing the Mediterranean and dying or the Sahara and dying on that surgeon to look for jobs in Europe. They can build a better future right here in Africa. Natural gas provides that hope.
Right. Thanks for sharing that, Angie. Maybe just also to our other guests, if you want to react to what you're listening, feel free to do so. Angie, maybe if you have maybe just one very quick, concrete example of what you're doing there, we would love to hear that.
One concrete example, what we're doing right now is that we're promoting a big multi-million-dollar natural gas project in Congo, Brazzaville. We advocating right now for more natural gas to be used in Mozambique because that natural gas is helping Europe at this time, but it also needs to help Africa. Gas to power projects that are being seen as potential in South Africa to end load shedding, where we're going 8 to 10 hours a day. This is Africa's most industrialized nation. It's in the dark. It's in crisis. We are turning around these natural gas projects, but also, and I'll close with this, we have to get our governments to move fast. An enabling environment that opens it, create an enabling environment that drives up free markets and really encourage this demand and this growth. That's going to work well for us. So Africans have a role to play. There are a lot of deals that can be signed that are not being signed right now. We are delaying, and we need to deal with corruption and transparency issues so that we don't resort to the ills of the past.
I think one of the major challenges here is also moving the governments fast, like NJ is saying, which is one of the biggest challenges. We're going to dig a little bit deep on that later on. Let me turn to our third panelist today, Laura Liberty. So Laura, welcome to this webinar. I think you're joining us from Rome in Italy, and you serve as the head of natural resources for development at the OECD Development Center. It's great to have you here, Laura.
Thank you. Pleased to join you.
Right. So Laura, just to set the context, maybe a quick reaction on what you've heard so far, and also this question to you. So we know that the OECD is focusing on sustainable development and natural resources. So how are you addressing the issue of gas in Africa while ensuring the global development policies actually do not harm the continent's interest, particularly in a context where we know that the OECD approaches have rarely served Africa? What can you say on that?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. First of all, I'd say that Africa is not a monolith, so the role of gas, in our view, would vary substantially across different African countries. For example, Kenya relies already on renewable sources of energy for 92%, while other countries like Nigeria are heavily dependent on fossil fuels. And as we have heard, South Africa is trying to transition away from coal, using gas as a transitional fuel. So we have different realities across Africa that require tailored solutions. And I think one should strive to understand what is the role of gas to achieve a sustainable, diversified, and affordable energy mix in order to achieve simultaneously climate and development objectives. Our work at the OECD Development Center is precisely designed to avoid a scenario in which countries would have to choose between reducing poverty, achieving a green transition, or preserving the planet. And to this end, we have established a multi-stakeholder process in order to get a better understanding on how gas can enable a transition to cleaner sources of energy, and how developing countries in particular can fully appreciate the risks and opportunities associated with the use of gas, taking into consideration that African countries have contributed least to global emissions, and that they are confronted with pressing needs to address developmental priorities.
Laura, let me just jump in very quickly here. We have a question from the audience coming and it's addressed to you. So Nigeria recently submitted a request for the UN to take a global tax mandate in order to ensure Africa has a voice in fiscal matters that affect the continent hugely. So just very quick reaction on this. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think this is a very good step in the right direction, because the best way to take into consideration the needs and concerns of African countries is for African countries to participate and have a voice in the international debate, contribute to shaping international standards. And that's what at the OECD we are already doing, since, for instance, our work on providing guidance on how to sustainably transition to cleaner sources of energy is co-chaired actually by Nigeria and the European Union. Nigeria is also a member of the new inclusive forum on carbon mitigation approaches. And has been an active member also of other initiatives at the OECD designed precisely to address and mobilize domestic resources for sustainable development. So I think that through this inclusive and participatory processes, countries like Nigeria can share their priorities and influence the way in which global standards are shaped.
Okay, Lara, I will get back to you. I have another question on that, but I would like to turn to our fourth panelist first. We have with us Sanjeev Gupta, the AFC member, Board of Directors. Sanjeev, thanks for joining. I know you're joining us live from Dubai. How are you there?
Very good, thank you. It's winter here, so it's cool.
All right, so it's kind of funny you're saying being cool, you're in Dubai. But anyway, that's a quick joke about the temperature just coming from Dubai. It was very hot, actually. So Sanjeev, AFC plays a crucial role in financing projects in Africa. We know that. So probably for our audience, tell us how the AFC is committed to reducing the perception of risks associated with investment in Africa and, of course, encouraging sustainable investment on the continent as at large.
Yeah, so thank you. And, you know, I think we can all safely agree that perceptions come from narratives, and narratives usually come from agendas, right? And for a very long time, for more than 2 centuries, arguably, we've had a constant narrative that the continent is risky, the continent is dangerous, the continent is got all kinds of problems, but it's still good enough to produce what the world needs in terms of its minerals and metals. So that narrative has been perpetuated for obvious agendas and continues to be so. Now, the good news here is that that narrative, which was controlled by a few, is now changing because you have more players who are interested on the continent. So you've got players from Asia, from the Gulf region, from the South American region, who for their own reasons are engaging in Africa, which means the narrative is therefore no longer linear or coming from just one source. The other reason why the narrative and therefore the risk perception is changing is that within the continent you have an increasing number of much more inspired governments, if you want to call them that, but also backed by very engaged DFIs and local financial institutions, which are doing a lot of good work to actually show that that narrative and that risk perception is flawed, right? And then the third reason why the risk perception is changing and will change is just out of sheer need. You know, as the world, and as we saw post the Ukraine war, or probably post the COVID as well, the world realizes the risk around depending on a few for your basic resource requirements. So Africa today is a solution to the world's food problems, to the world's energy problem, to the world's renewable energy source problems, to the world's critical minerals problem. So that's another reason why the risk perception will change, because need will basically force the global markets to engage with Africa. So from our side, very quickly, you know, the job is therefore getting simpler because of all these reasons that I said. And fundamentally, we kind of say that you can shout from the treetops as much as you want. These sort of panels help. But at the end of the day, it's the actions that will speak louder. So for us, it's our projects. It's the way we develop projects, the way we de-risk projects, the way we mitigate the risks around it and offer it to global investors to come and participate, that ultimately will mean that the risk perception will go down. I'll just end by highlighting a fact, which is a data point actually, which probably most people know of but conveniently forget, is that the project default rates on the African continent is actually one of the lowest in the world. It's in fact the second lowest after the Gulf region. So it's not true that when people engage, invest, and develop projects in Africa, they usually get disappointed. What is true, however, is that a lot of work has to go in to manage those risks. So if you're prepared to do so, then frankly, there is a huge arbitrage between what is a perception and what is a reality.
I think we all agree on that. And Sanjeev, I have a few thoughts. I'll get back to that later. So maybe David, just quick brief reaction we've heard of different panelists here, and also the question goes, there's some kind of inconsistency between sometimes the investment policies of European DFIs in Africa. If we exclude the example of the natural gas, for example, that is designated as green by the European Union, while some of these very same countries are investing in polluting projects at home, how can DFIs, align their investment criteria, make it more coherent and equitable standards to support sustainable development in Africa?
Yeah, I can react to what was just said
before,
and to your question at the same
Fantastic,
time,
David.
I think, because what we haven't talked about yet is we need to avoid the risk that Africa gets locked into a fossil fuel infrastructure. And I think Sanjeev said it very clear. There are so many opportunities for Africa to play a crucial role for future global generations in terms of agriculture, energy, that if Africa gets locked into fossil fuel infrastructure right now, Africa will end up in the same type of problems that NJ just mentioned that Europe is in now. And that also explains the inconsistency that's there. Europe is locked into fossil fuel infrastructure and has been cruelly woken up by the Ukraine conflict that is not sustainable. What you see now is, and I disagree with NJ actually, that in Europe they massively went to coal. What you do see in Europe is a massive push towards renewable energy that will last. Africa needs to learn from that and actually try to seize and build infrastructure now in Africa that is focused and geared towards renewable energy. Of course, it needs to be balanced with sustainable development. This generation also needs to go to school. The hospitals of this generation also need to be powered. And the DFIs are fully aware of that. That's also why in our climate and energy statement, we're actually not excluding gas. We're able as DFIs to invest in gas-powered projects, provided it's Paris aligned, and of course provided it's fully disclosed and there's transparent decision making on it. But in fact, we're trying to balance this crucial need for Africa, for future generations of Africa, to build a renewable energy infrastructure in Africa. That will really help for Africa to play its global role, with the need of this generation to have access to energy. And that balance actually with AFC and other African companies, so far we're doing I think a good job. As Sanjeev said, the DFIs are actually increasing their investments. And I think with that addressing that inconsistency in our investment policy, and through this statement, for instance, really helps us to work together with African companies to make sure that balance is there between sustainable development and future investments in renewable infrastructure.
Getting back to maybe what Sanjeev mentioned earlier, so for Africa to become this, we need Africa in a way, and Africa has the answers. This is really what you said earlier. If I go back to the Africa Climate Summit that was held in Nairobi, and to quote what President Ruto said in a way, so we've seen Africa. We should stop to look at Africa as a victim, but Africa has been a long ignored ally in the fight against global warming. So President Ruto was clearly stating that there's the demand a fair playing ground for our African countries to access the investment needed to unlock the potential and translate it into opportunities. But I would like to reflect a second on the long ignored ally, because when we look at what's happening in the different events taking place around climate, around critical minerals, how many people are sitting on the table? It's like Africa has all the answers, but how many people are around the table who are actually African? That's a real question. And I don't know who wants just to share some thoughts about that. Why are we failing there? Who wants to jump in?
let me come into this because I think I've got a couple of things to point out here. I think it's interesting. It's fascinating actually that you choose to use the word ally, because unfortunately
it's President Ruto actually who said that.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I was intrigued when he said that, because obviously as a president of a major economy in Africa, he had to choose his words carefully. But the evidence, frankly, is one of Africa being looked at as more of a object of exploitation and extraction. It has never really been treated as an ally. However, the good news is that it is changing, and it's changing because of the reasons I cited. That firstly, Africa has choices as in where money will come from to engage in Africa. Africa has choices in terms of geopolitics, which it didn't have before. And also African institutions and African governments, as I said earlier, themselves have managed to mobilize domestic money, domestic savings, to start doing something in the domestic economies and then blend it with global capital, rather than waiting for global capital to deliver, which it has not. So to me, the ally concept really therefore stems or probably relies on this whole idea that I personally vouch for and recommend. And that is that as Africans on the continent, it's not true that Africa doesn't have capital, or Africa doesn't have savings, or Africa doesn't have reserves. However, we have been conditioned to put those monies in a certain way. And that conditioning we are challenging now, so that Africa's money, be it the pension funds, be it the life funds, be it the reserves, be it the surpluses, stop getting parked in global institutions, but starts working for Africa. And there are ways and means of doing so. And if you do that, that's when people will see you as an ally. Because ally, the very word means equality. It means collaboration. It doesn't mean dependency. And that's how I see the alliance of allies happening.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Angie, I would like to hear from you, a piece of your brain. Just a quick reaction on that.
I think we are. I agree with Sanjay about the word ally, but I also think you need to come to the table, even if you don't let you in. I always believe bring a folded chair. If we are not on the table, we are going to be on the menu. And we have to have considered effort as Africans to really go in there and work and do our own, play our own role. That's why for us at the Energy Chamber, we encourage African leaders to say, go to COP, be part of it, make your voices heard, be part of the discussions, go to global discussions. They might not agree with you all the time, but make your voices heard, because when we come together, we can find some of our commonalities. We have no problem with maybe with green energy. We think some African countries have more green energy in their power systems than even some Western countries. We have to be part of that, and we have to showcase that. But we also have to show dignity. We also have to show how we treat business. So when it comes into how we do things with markets, how we engage with taxes, and how we engage in sustainability, we have to be part of that. But to go back to what the good doctor said, I'm not so worried about stranded fossil fuel assets. I'm worried about stranded lives across Africa that have nothing, that don't have hope, that don't have a chance. Those stranded lives, financing $600 billion in green bonds, less than 2% went to Africa. That's something that we need to pay attention to. We need to
Absolutely.
look at the supply chain of renewables. We need to build that supply chain in Africa. It's not, you talk about the fossil fuel trap, it's not going to be right if we take all Africa's rare earth and critical minerals and all the mines, all the minerals, and send wealthy countries, and then Africans have to buy finished product. If you look at a ship today coming to Africa from Europe, our trade deficit is horrible. What happens? That ship brings a lot of goods into Africa and goes back empty because it takes nothing out of Africa when it comes into goods that are manufactured, produced in Africa. We need, if we are going to talk about some corrective justice and really trying to reshape, we need to really start talking about climate justice and a just transition, because Africans do deserve to be treated with the dignity that they deserve, not handouts, not, but to really sit down there. How are we financing African women in renewables? African women or Black women in renewables are still the last hired and the first fired. We are not really addressing those issues. The majority of the companies there are not really African. Africans are being held back, but they're being lectured. That's why we believe that there need to be some equity. There need to be some justice. We can't talk about ESG and say we want to transform how we do business, but we don't want to transform how we engage with African business and really, really power up African women at this time when they are 52% of the African population. That, if we don't address that, we are going to be failing in our
Right.
challenge to really to meet all these goals. And this comes from a fossil fuel guy who has and comes from an industry that has not really done its best with issues around women.
Thank you, Angie, for sharing. Just coming back to what you mentioned, I would like just to reflect very briefly on the mineral supply chains, the critical minerals that you mentioned about. Sanjeev, you mentioned it. Angie, you mentioning it. So I had the opportunity to speak to Commissioner Abu Zaid for Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union a couple of weeks ago, and she said to me, in her own words, while Africa is supplying most of the critical minerals for the green energy transition, and I want to quote her own words. She said to me, if we represent 80% of the minerals, I would expect 80% of the participants around the table to be African. But that is not the case. So, of course, I would like to hear from the OECD, because I know the OECD had a forum earlier this year on responsible mineral supply chains, and the IEA Critical Energy Summit, who took place 2 months ago here in Paris. What are your thoughts on that? Why are we struggling to get there? Have all, that be equitable, the justice we're speaking about? Maybe a quick word, Lara, from the OECD perspective.
Yes, thank you. And as part of the work we are doing on supporting developing countries' transition to a low carbon future, we're putting focus on and a spot on critical minerals, of course, because Africa should seize know the opportunities and capitalize on the opportunities that are presented by critical minerals. To ensure, but at the same time, it needs to ensure that these critical minerals do not create another trap for Africa, another trap of extractivism, and to replicate the colonial paradigm of exploitation, as we have already heard. And in that respect, what we're trying to do is to bring together I disagree with what was said before. I think there is still mutual dependence between Africa and Europe in particular on critical minerals. Europe is not a mineral-rich country. Africa, mineral-rich continent. Africa is a mineral-rich continent. Europe, as the technology, knowledge, and also the resources that are required to help Africa make the most of its natural resources.
Lara, don't you think we're having more of a, when I look at what previously at the climate summit in Nairobi, we heard civil society demonstrating and saying that we have a Western agenda and the resources are here still. We have the resources here, but the agenda is a Western agenda. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's a Western agenda. I mean, Africa has developed its own strategy on critical minerals, which is centered around achieving value addition, productive transformation, and sustainable development. So we need to bring those two both importing and exporting economies to the table in order to ensure that this transition works on both sides, both for Africa and for not only Western, but the global world, because this is a global transition. It's not the Western or the China transition or Africa transition. We are all in the same boat. And what should be avoided is that this critical minerals are used for to foster sustainable development in developing countries. And yes, a just green transition on both sides, and that the benefits from mining are more equitably shared across countries and within countries. And what I mean is that, I mean, we always talk about clean and clean energy sources. In reality, yes, the solar and the wind are clean, but what you need in order to produce those clean technologies is actually more mining, which would likely take place in developing countries in Africa in particular. And so it is crucial to account for the environmental and social impacts and maximize the financial and sustainable development outcomes from mining activities. And in that respect, at the OECD, we have done a lot of work in order to ensure that working with African countries to maximize the developmental potential of mining, which is not much related with direct employment, given the trends towards automation and digitization, but rather to use these big mining projects as anchors for renewable development, so for infrastructure development. And also it is crucial for mining contracts to be negotiated in such a way to ensure this fair sharing of benefits and taking into consideration the rights and interests and concerns of the communities. So there has been a tendency, to look at these contracts as deals between governments and investors. I think that communities will need to be central part in this equation, and that governments will have to make sure that their interests and rights, in particular indigenous peoples, are protected, as well as the environment.
Thank you, Lara. I would like hear a little bit, maybe Sanjeev. I will get back to you, David. Sanjeev, if you would like to comment on that part. I mean, the question really was: are we were speaking about equitable, like having all the right stakeholders around the table, and we still feel that there's not this kind of right balance between those who have the resources and those who are deciding about it. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so why I was keen to come back into the conversation was I hold the view that nothing's going to be achieved by getting into any form of blame game, and nothing's ever going to be achieved by trying to wear some sort of a victim hat and expect some sort of what you call forgiveness and apology and restitution. That's not how it works. So I was very sort of amused with NJ's choice of words, because I do believe that nobody gets what they deserve. They only get what they negotiate, right? So it's not about what we deserve, it's about what we can negotiate. And to me, today, the global world is in such a state, it's in such a sort of inflection point that it represents perhaps the biggest opportunity ever in written history of mankind, probably, for African countries to collectively bargain for a position that allows them to use both their fossil fuels and non-fossil fuels to utilize and industrialize their nations by developing mineral resources within the continent. This opportunity wasn't there before. So it is up to us to be able to collectively bargain. It is up to us to be able to mobilize our limited but available domestic capital to develop and de-risk projects. And then it is up to us to bring in global capital to work with us at that level. So that's
and
why,
this is also, Sanjay, what you're doing at the AFC.
Yeah.
This is what you're doing at the AFC. You're actively supporting companies to participate in those dialogues, right?
Not just dialogues. I mean, we've done actual tangible projects where hitherto, till we got in, African countries were exporting a certain kind of primary commodity or primary metal in primary form. And we set up the infrastructure, the energy solutions, the special economic zones to be able to manufacture, add value on the country before it got exported. Creates jobs, builds infrastructure that has a commercial relevance to it, and it brings more taxes for the government and foreign exchange earnings. So we've done it. We've done it with timber in Gabon. We're doing it with cashew nuts and cotton in other countries. We're doing it with critical minerals in Southern Africa. So that's why I'm saying that I hate to come into a conversation where there is some deserving aspect to our lives that somebody must look at. It's never going to happen. It's about us making things happen, and things are happening because, as I said, there are allies available. So queue up. It's no longer a case of I want to be your ally. It's a case of stand in queue. I'll decide who I'll work with based on my terms. And that is happening. Right. So I'll just end by one final comment, if I may, just to kind of show some solidarity to my colleague from South Africa, NJ. I actually do believe that the case he's putting up is a very strong case. I don't think there is any energy mix that I have seen in 50 years' time that says that there will be no oil and gas.
Right.
We're talking about net zero, not gross zero. So Africa should not be chucked out of that particular space where oil and gas will still exist. I think Africa needs it to manage its fiscal budgets. It needs it to develop its own people, and therefore it should not be rejected completely. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. David, there are lots, I'm sure you want to react and comment, and also probably just if you could give us some insight on what at the EDFI is, what you're doing, what you're planning to support this clean energy and infrastructure projects, and also how do you intend to overcome those hurdles? There are many on the way, we've heard it.
Yeah, let me quickly react to this discussion, which is fascinating, and I agree with most of what Sanjay also just said. But I want to pick up on one concept that Lara mentioned, mutual dependence. And mutual dependence can actually be an opportunity for both parties, provided it's managed well in a multilateral framework. And I think, and this is also where I would agree with...
Which is not the case today.
Exactly. That's also where I would agree with NJ, is that the voice of Africa at those multilateral tables is insufficiently heard. Now, what is the solution to that? I think it's the solution, we're already seeing a bit of that in terms of a step up in African leadership. We see Macky Sall, we see President Ruto, you just mentioned him. We see key African countries playing a far more important role on the global stage than 10, 20 years ago. That is important. But the other part of improving the leverage of Africa at the multilateral negotiation table needs to come from the domestic side. Sanjay mentioned earlier pension funds, local development banks, but the entire African private sector could do a lot to influence their governments more. And if I look at the multilateral position of Europe, which is enormous, and a lot of that position has been informed by conglomerations, associations of companies, investors, etc. Africa needs to organize that. And we are there actually as DFIs also to help not governments, but to help companies to get to the action that can support that kind of joint voice of the private sector in Africa. Now, in terms of your second question was on the renewable energy, what we can do. Yes,
exactly. What are you doing? I mean, I know that you're working to support the clean energy and infrastructure projects, so with the investment going in the right direction, hopefully. So what are you putting in place? What are you doing? Maybe if you could share concrete.
Concrete, the DFIs concretely are, I think last year it was about 700 million. Euro that we invested in renewable energy projects together. These are new projects. That is something that we're...
Both public and private sector?
No, just private sector.
Just private
The
sector.
DFIs are just private sector.
Just private sector.
Yeah, some sub-sovereign. Yeah, it's good to say. I should have said it in the beginning. But
it's a lot of money,
this is really about private sector. So it's a lot of money. And as Lara said, Africa is not a monolith, but this is spread all over Africa. But it's not just the money that counts. It's really about also the technical assistance that we bring to companies to help them comply to global standards. That is something that we are doing, that we're also trying to do to take away the hurdles to this investment. And again, just to repeat what I said earlier, we're not excluding gas, provided it's Paris aligned. All African countries also signed up to the Paris Agreement. So the investments that we're looking at will see the Paris alignment being core and central to our due diligence.
Thank you, David. So maybe just on the cost of capital for African countries, this is a critical topic because this is still quite high. Looking at the latest OECD 2023 report, so the yield spread on an average African euro bond, which is a measure of the potential of cost of borrowing on capital markets, among 20 African countries issuing this type of bond, has reached its highest level for 15 years at around 12% in September 2022, eclipsing previous peaks of around 9% during the 2008 global financial crisis. Maybe Lara, just before I ask you the question, probably reminding our audience here, I think the link is on the chat. You can access the report by clicking on it. So Lara, maybe what are the OECD's initiatives to promote more stable, more coherent public policies in Africa in order to mitigate the risks, of course, perceived by the investors and encourage sustainable investment on the continent? Would like to hear your thoughts, Lara. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And well, I mentioned, I think before the partnership that was renewed with Africa on the occasion of the 2023 edition of the International Forum on Africa, where the OECD and Africa agreed to work towards shared priorities in terms of fostering green transition, just green transition, productive transformation, and diversification of Africa's economies. We are also working with Africa to bring risks, perceptions of risks more aligned with the realities of the African continent, and we intend to do so through the establishment of an African virtual investment platform that will be launched in April 2024. And this work is done jointly by the OECD with the African Union Commissions, and is precisely intended to align risks with perceptions of risk with realities, reduce cost of capital, and improve quality of information for investors. in order for them to make more informed decisions about the opportunity to invest in Africa. So it is designed, first of all, to provide a one-stop shop for data and information on all types of investment in Africa, be they public, private, domestic, or foreign. And it's not just about any investment, but the quality also of the investment to contribute to Africa's productive transformation agenda. The platform will also improve global knowledge of Africa's investment priorities and needs, document good practices for productive transformation, and also support dialogue between Africa and the international partners to fast-track resource mobilization. So I think this shows how the OECD considers Africa a partner for shared prosperity. And there are also other streams of work, of course, that are underway. You mentioned, for instance, the work on responsible sourcing of minerals, our work on the low carbon transition, where we don't work on Africa, but we work with Africa to find the workable approaches and solutions.
I'd like to hear Angie on that one. Angie, do you agree with that? Are you happy with the partner concept that we've just heard?
Of course, I love the partner concept, because you know why? We are
I knew
not
it. That's
victims.
why I asked you the question.
Absolutely. I love the partner. It's just like we are not victims. The partnerships is what we want. Africa and Europe, we like peanut butter and jelly. We get along very well. So we need to partner up. But also, I got to end with this. We are not prisoners of the past. The past is reference, not residence. We're prisoners of hope, of a hopeful future, that we can walk together, we can stand together. But we also should be really thinking thoughtful and looking forward. Looking forward in saying, David, $700 million is not enough. We need to go to $7 billion in 2024 on the green hydrogen projects, on
You've
some
got work
of the
to do,
big
David.
and I need 7 billion. 700 is too little. It hurts my heart to think we can't get 7 billion. But I also think that we need. I love Dr. Laura, by the way. She's so pragmatic. But I do believe that as we drive this, we really need to have that fierce urgency of now, and Africans have to do their part. This is the African. We're talking about Africans. It can't be the job of Europe or America or Asia. We in Africa have to look at those policies. How do we deal with taxes? How do we deal with bureaucracy? How do we deal with fixing our doing business records? How do we deal with correcting some of our own ills of the past? With transparency, with governance. We have to have that bold, brilliant conversations and say, these issues, these tenets, because you know why Sanjeev is raising money. You know why? We're not competing for dollars between Zimbabwe and South Africa, or Namibia and Botswana. We're competing with Guyana. We're competing with Norway. We're competing for the same dollars in the same global pool. We have to get our act together, and private business has to get their corporate governance in place. We got to be able to step up, and we got to do the right things if we are going to meet their challenge. But we got to be able to push our own governments to give us that enabling environment. I don't think it's the job of somebody coming from Europe to do that. We got to have homegrown push, because we know if we do that, the market is going to react to it. More funding is going to come, more businesses, and we're going to have a few more African millionaires and African impact businesses that are really going to be able to change this continent for the better.
Thank you, Angie, for sharing that. There's one theme that I've heard a little bit. I can't remember who said it, but we spoke about local communities creating value for both investors and local communities. March this year, I was in Libreville with President Macron for the One Forest Summit, and this was something that we spoke a lot about, that we need to have the local communities as the different stakeholders around the table, the indigenous people. We need to have them in those conversations. We're speaking about the green transition, and they have some valuable knowledge. Are we taking that into account? Anyone would like to jump in there?
Yes, we are. I think local communities are going to play a role, and I think the fossil fuel guys should talk on this. Let's be honest. When it comes, fossil fuels has not been good with local communities. Let's just admit that. We've seen issues in the Niger Delta in Nigeria. We've seen issues in Cabo Delgado on how where because of fossil fuels or energy or any kind of projects, the communities have always been left behind. This is a chance where we should learn from the past and turn that around. Right now, there should be no reason, and I wrote that in my book, there should be no reason that we should not have community set-asides and community trust funds, see how it works, which goes into education, community infrastructure, job training, and hospitals and other things that community needs, and communities could manage that. And you bring in some of the best minds in Africa to help drive that across. That should be a key tenet and central to any kind of green investment, to really see that communities do participate, not only by having a voice or so to speak. I think right now we're stuck with the idea of saying we ask for their opinion. Their opinion is not enough. We ask for their action, because their action is going to live and is going to turn around a situation that we want to see it better. And that is where you start having small businesses become active participants in that growth, because they get low contracts. And that's those small businesses become more, and those small businesses create jobs, and you start seeing multiplier jobs going around that community. Then you start having community stability, a healthy community, protecting the environment, driving growth. That's how you get it done. But there has to be a concerted effort and tied into an investment principle that makes that happen.
And Sanjeev, we can create value both for investors and local communities. It's not incompatible.
Yeah, so if you will allow me, I just want to make one comment on the cost of money, and then I'll answer this. So very quickly, everything that could have been said has been said about cost of money in Africa. But, there's two realities in play. One is we know for a fact that global public sector capital is not enough to provide the funding gap that exists in the continent. And the funding gap on the African continent is huge. So per force, we have to find ways and means of bringing global private sector capital into the continent. And it's needed because of 1.5 billion people who need a future, right? So it is for the world that we need to do it. And a couple of things that I would like to highlight here, which we've been discussing with European DFIs as well, is that rather than providing direct funding support, they should start looking at credit enhancements, guarantees, first loss covers that allows private sector to allocate capital on the back of it, because then the risk gets reduced. The other one point I'll make quickly is that something that is being talked about but needs to be accelerated is the whole issue of carbon credits and carbon trading, because Africa provides a huge opportunity for global companies to come, invest, and get their carbon credits. And we need to work on that. And one final point which will help funding and cost of funding is currently we have, through the IMF, what we call the special drawing rights, the SDRs, and it's completely distorted. Just to give you an example, Germany gets more SDR as a developed economy than Africa as a whole gets as a developing continent. So those are the structural issues that needs to be looked at if cost of capital is going to be coming down for Africa, and if private sector capital from global sources is going to come to Africa. I just thought I'll mention that. Quickly on the issue of community, you're absolutely right. Personally, and as AFC, we don't see a separation between community issues and investment decisions, because if you do not involve the community, if you do not relate to their needs, you do not reduce the risk of your assets. You do not reduce the risk of maintaining and sustaining those assets. And more importantly, you therefore will never develop an investment that feeds into a need for the community. So for us, when we look at community issues, climate issues, resiliency issues, we look at it as part of our overall risk framework when we assess the credit itself. And I'll just finish by saying that please understand that whilst the global world can talk about climate change and its issues and challenges, on the African continent, people face it every day because people's personal livelihoods, personal mobility, personal homes are destroyed and damaged because of climate change. So if we, as an institution on Africa, cannot build infrastructure that essentially embraces resiliency as an integral part of our risk management, we are fooling ourselves.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Keep pushing your questions. We have approximately 10 minutes left before the end of the show. I have this one. I think this one is for you, David. A question to DFI. The mandate of DFIs is to de-risk and crowd in investments and ultimately finance development. Shouldn't DFIs take more risky bets and be less focused on compliance and due diligence while financing energy projects? I know you love that question.
I love that question. Actually, I just wanted to react to Sanjeev and NJ, and that's basically the answer to this question as well. Like the way NJ sketched the homework that needs to be done on the African side, on the governance side, and etc. There's homework to be done at the DFI side as well, in particular also with our shareholders, to ensure that the risk-bearing capital that we need to move further into pioneering investments, and that's what you need for renewable energy, to go from 700 million to 7 billion, to say it in NJ's word, you need to be able to move far deeper into pioneering investments. And for that, you need some public capital. We call this blended finance facilities. Sanjeev just referred to that. A big frustration is that these blended finance facilities exist. Several of these are actually quite successful. Why are these not replicated?
That's a very good question.
And that's a question that DFI should also look at. Is it the compliance issue and the KYC and the standards, etc.? In a way, I mean, we're talking about global standards, and I heard NJ say earlier that it's actually in the announcement of this webinar is, should we tackle global standard setters? Tackling is the wrong metaphor, because it means the standard setter will go down. If you tackle someone on the football field, they go down. That's not what we want. We want global standards. We want to move to these standards, but we need to actually make very clear to the standard setters that these standards need to be upheld in some symbiosis with the local reality. So the actual interoperability of frameworks from African governments and European governments, etc., and the European Union, that needs to be, we need to work towards a common goal of interoperability and longer transition periods. And maybe also with that, we can actually move to a much better replication of these blended finance facilities. Because I do think that what the question that was just asked, part of the solution is really in bringing some of that public capital, and I agree with Sanjeev, there is not enough to do this entire agenda, but some of that public capital needs to be used to attract the global institutional and commercial money. And Africa is far too important for the future global agenda to be cut off from that institutional and commercial funding. It's in all of our interest to make sure that that flows in the first place now, and that moves to the trillions in the future.
And also something we spoke about is the scaling. The problem is, how can we scale?
Yeah.
We have brilliant examples, but at a very small scale level, and then the replication, the scaling, how can we make progress?
This is one element, because of the other element is actually, I think a key to the solution is also in the local communities. Because the problem with another problem with blended finance facilities is that there are not enough projects to finance. But we know that Africa has endless opportunities. So how do you translate
So what
these
you mean
endless
is
opportunities?
the money is there, we don't have the project to channel them in?
It needs to be structured in a bankable deal.
Yeah.
It's a very simple, and you can only do that together with local communities. That's something that another part of the homework of DFIs is to figure out a way how can we work far more with local actors to make sure that local opportunities are actually going to be transformed to bankable deals. And there are some facilities out there run by some of the members of our organization, for instance the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, that work with a grant facility with local NGOs to make sure that opportunities are not just there but actually translated into a bankable deal and then can be brought to scale.
So I think you need to meet NJ somehow, because the
Yeah,
700 million is not enough. NJ was saying we need more money, so maybe you guys should connect and have a chat and channel the money in the right places, NJ.
Absolutely, NJ.
So okay, invite me for that lunch. I would like to be there. All right, I think we have just a couple of minutes left, and I have so many other questions to ask you, but that's always frustrating as a journalist because you always have lots of questions and not enough time. So maybe this final round of question before we close our show today is just really one, not very long, very concise answer. Just if you had like to one specific advice to share on how we can get the African voices heard better. Just one key message from each one of you. That would be fantastic. And maybe we start with you, NJ.
You need to put skin in the game. You don't wait for others to do for you. Like what I said in the beginning, if you're not on the table, you're gonna be on the menu. Africans get invited to the table most of the time. We don't show up. Go meet David, go meet Laura, and go take the money from Sanjeev. If you get in the
Yes, Sanjeev, you're in Dubai, and yes, there's lots of money there, so we're coming, right? So Sanjeev, a quick word on that.
I think there's two parts to it. One is a very practical one, and this is real. I'm not trying to be funny when I say this. That it would really help if the registration fees and the hotel accommodation costs could come down for the major global events, because it makes a big dent to some of the African countries' budgets
Sanjeev,
when they have to send delegations.
Quickly, that's one of the reasons that why many journalists are not going to the COP. I'm telling you, and part of my own team. So anyway, yes, go on.
Yeah, and it's a practical issue. I'll tell you why. Because when I attend the World Bank meetings, the UN UNGA meetings, or the COP meetings, or the Davos meetings, Africans are there, but they are not in large numbers because they have budget constraints. So they are not there as wide and as distributed as other delegations are. And this is very practical, real, and I say it in jest, but as I say, never a truer word is spoken than in jest. So this is what I would say. The second part is pretty much what I've been saying right through this afternoon, and that is that, actions will have to speak louder than words. It's up to us to do what we are doing well, and to be able to narrate that. And nothing is more compelling or more powerful than investors, global investors, who have worked with us on projects, seeing the returns they're made, to talk for us. And that's something that I think we have failed to do much about, and that we need to improve on.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Lara, your final words.
Yes, on our side, I would say that the door is open. We have been working for years with African countries strongly represented, I must say, in our meetings, in particular the policy dialogue, natural resource-based development, and in general in all the activities of the OECD. I would encourage, as it was said, African countries to actively participate to this global fora and articulate their positions and express their concerns and needs, because there is I think merit in improving understanding around the realities of Africa and around the huge potential that Africa has in order to create win-win-win for governments, investors, and local communities, opportunities, and to get this energy transition right for all of us.
Thank you, Lara. The final words, David, it's yours today. You're on the set with me, so there you go.
Thanks, and I just have a few seconds left, I think. Just to summarize, Lara, unity of purpose. that's very important. Also between public and private sector, making sure it's not just between Africa and Europe, between public and private sector, there needs to be unity of purpose. One thing that I also would like to mention, wasn't really mentioned here, but it's extremely important, it's data. We need data to make sure that we can standardize things. It's another big obstacle to why this is not scaling up, is because we don't know what we're talking about. If we're talking about impact, we need much better data.
We need a whole show on that.
Absolutely. So the whole digitalization agenda is important for Africa's growth and productivity agenda, but it's also important for our operations. And data are going to play a big role in scaling up this business.
So that's where we end.
Yeah.
And I felt you wanted to add something just very
No,
quickly.
it's just that I wanted to say maybe we should organize another webinar on that.
I think the message is loud and clear. Well, that wraps up actually the last webinar brought to you by the Africa CEO Forum. I would like to thank our panelists here, David Cooper from NG AYUK, and we also have, of course, Sanjeev Gupta and Lara Liberty. Thank you to all four of you for sharing valuable insights with us today. It was great to have this discussion. I think we would have spoken for another hour, and we still have lots of things to say. And maybe we'll listen to you, David, and have another show to continue this conversation. Your expertise, of course, and invaluable contributions have enriched these discussions, shedding light on the imperative of amplifying African voices in global standards-setting forums. A big thank you to our audience for your questions today. You have sent your question here, and of course, within the time we tried to do our best to get them answered. Thank you very much to all of you, and that's the final episode of our series. It was great to be on the show. I'm Asha Sampath. Thank you very much. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you.